The rain was coming down in thick gray sheets, a relentless, driving torrent that turned the world into a blur of water and sound. From the shelter of my workshop on the hill, I looked down into the valley below, at the sprawling, multi-million-dollar homes of the Emerald Bay Estates, and I watched as the water rose. Their perfect emerald green lawns, the ones they paid thousands of dollars a year to maintain, were gone, submerged under a foot of churning brown water. Their expensive, custom-built flagstone patios, the ones with the built-in fire pits and pizza ovens, were now just a series of treacherous rocky islands. The creek, the gentle, babbling brook that had once been the centerpiece of their natural landscaping, was now a raging 50-foot wide river, a furious brown serpent that was clawing at the foundations of their $10 million homes. Could see her. Brenda, the president of their homeowners association. She was standing on the second-story balcony of her massive glass-walled house, a tiny, frantic figure in the storm. She was screaming, her voice lost in the roar of the wind and the water. I knew who she was screaming at. She was screaming at me. I just stood there, a mug of hot coffee in my hand, and watched as the world she had built, the kingdom she had ruled with an iron fist, was slowly, beautifully, and inexorably washed away. She had started this war, but I was the one who was going to finish it. And that's when everything went wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. What would you do if this happened to you? And subscribe to HOA Files. To understand that moment of beautiful biblical justice, you have to understand the land, the lake, and the legacy my grandfather left me. My name is Arthur. For 40 years, my life was a world of concrete and steel. I was a civil engineer, a dam operator. I worked for the Army Corps of Engineers, managing some of the largest hydroelectric dams in the country. I understand, in a way that few people do, the awesome, terrifying, and utterly indifferent power of water. I know how to hold it back, and I know how to let it go. When my wife passed away, I retired. I came home to the place I had grown up, my family's ancestral property, 100-acre slice of heaven tucked away in the mountains. The heart of this property was a 20-acre, spring-fed lake, a body of water so clear and still my grandmother had named it Serenity Lake. And holding that serenity in place was my grandfather's masterpiece, a beautiful, old, stone and earth dam he had built with his own two hands in the 1940s. It wasn't a massive concrete monolith like the ones I had managed. It was a work of art, a part of the landscape, and it was mine to maintain. Every morning, for the last 5 years of my retirement, my routine was the same. I'd walk the length of the dam, check the spillway for debris, and make a small, careful adjustment to the large cast iron wheel that controlled the main sluice gate at the bottom of the dam. It was a ritual, a quiet conversation with the water and with the memory of my grandfather. The land downstream from my dam, the land that the creek from my spillway flowed through, had once been a quiet wooded valley. But 10 years ago, it had been sold to a developer and transformed into Emerald Bay, an exclusive high-end community of vacation homes for the ultra-wealthy. And the undisputed queen of this new glittering kingdom was the HOA president. Brenda was a woman who seemed to be perpetually at war with the natural world. She saw my beautiful, slightly wild property not as a historic homestead, but as an unkempt, undeveloped eyesore that was a blight on her perfect, manicured community. Her first interaction with me set the tone for the entire conflict. She showed up at my door, uninvited, her face a mask of polite concern that did a poor job of hiding her deep-seated disapproval. "Arthur," she'd said, her eyes scanning the old, weathered cedar of my private dock. "I'm Brenda, the president of the Emerald Bay HOA. We, the board, have some serious concerns about the safety and aesthetics of your structure." "My dock?" I'd asked, baffled. "It's been here for 80 years. It's as solid as a rock." "It's an eyesore," she'd stated flatly, the politeness vanishing. "It's old, it's unpainted, and it does not conform to the modern, luxury aesthetic of our community. It brings down the property values for all of us. We expect you to have it removed." I just stared at her. My property was not, and never had been, a part of her HOA. She had absolutely no jurisdiction, no authority, no say whatsoever in what I did on my own land. No, I'd said, my voice quiet but firm. I will not be removing my dock. Look she gave me was one of pure, venomous disbelief. I had not just refused her, I had defied her. In her mind, I had committed an act of open rebellion. She was going to crush it. The war began with a letter. A formal notice from the HOA, citing a dozen different covenant violations that did not apply to me, and fining me for the blight of my dock. I had my lawyer send a standard boilerplate, "You have no jurisdiction over my property. Please, cease and desist. Letter back." Brenda's response was to escalate. She had her own high-priced lawyers send a new, more threatening letter. This one didn't just cite HOA bylaws. It claimed, in a masterpiece of legal fiction, that my old sturdy dock was a public nuisance, a navigational hazard on my own private lake, and a potential source of chemical pollution from the untreated wood. It threatened to petition the state's Department of Environmental Protection to have it condemned if I did not remove it immediately. It was an empty threat, of course. The DEP would have laughed her out of the state, but the message was clear. She was willing to lie, to cheat, to use any means necessary to get her way. And then she escalated from legal threats to criminal action. I came home one afternoon from a trip into town to find my dock had been vandalized. Several of the heavy redwood planks had been pried loose and thrown into the lake, and spray painted across the remaining deck in bright, garish orange letters were the words, "HOA violation. Remove now." My anger was a cold, hard knot in the pit of my stomach. This was no longer a petty squabble. This was a criminal act. I reported it to the sheriff. I filed a report. There was no proof, no witnesses, just my word against hers. So I installed security cameras, high-definition, night vision cameras, hidden in the trees, covering every inch of my shoreline. I knew she would be back. People like Brenda, people so consumed by their own sense of righteousness, they can never leave well enough alone. I didn't have to wait long. A week later, my cameras caught her. The footage was crystal clear, a beautiful, damning record of her crime. She returned, not alone this time, but with 2 hired goons. They weren't just vandalizing the dock. They had a small work barge with a crane and chainsaws. They were physically, systematically demolishing it. They were cutting the pilings at the waterline, letting the sections of the dock my father had taught me to fish from, the dock where I had shared my last beautiful sunset with my wife, crash into the water and sink into the mud. Violation was so profound, so absolute, it felt like a physical blow. She was destroying a piece of my history, a piece of my heart. But before I could even call the sheriff and show them the new, irrefutable evidence, she made her final, fatal, and glorious mistake. She got arrogant. She got proud. She posted about it on the official Emerald Bay HOA community Facebook page. She framed it as a heroic act of community service. "A big win for Emerald Bay today," her post began, accompanied by a photo of my ruined dock. The hazardous, dilapidated, and non-compliant structure upstream has finally been removed by the HOA for the safety and beautification of our entire community. A big thank you to the board for taking decisive action to protect our property, values, and our beautiful views. She had just publicly, in writing with photographic evidence, confessed to a felony. That night, as I watched the security camera footage of the destruction on a loop, my grief and my rage began to transform. It cooled. It hardened. It settled into a cold, hydraulic calm. I was a man who understood water. I understood pressure. And I understood with a sudden, beautiful clarity that Brenda, in her infinite, arrogant ignorance, had just handed me the keys to the floodgates. She wanted to talk about water levels. She wanted to talk about community impact. Fine, we'll talk. I walked out of my house and into the cool, dark night. I walked to my grandfather's dam. I looked at the big cast-iron spoked wheel that controlled the main sluice gate at the bottom of the dam, the gate that let the deep water of the lake flow out into the creek that ran through her precious valley. For 50 years, My family had kept that gate partially open, a gesture of goodwill to our downstream neighbors, maintaining the lake at a lower, more manageable level, creating the gentle, picturesque, babbling brook that their real estate brochures were so fond of. I then went back to my study and pulled out the original master deed and survey for my property from 1942. I smoothed out the old, brittle paper, and I looked at the one crucial number: the legally deeded, officially recorded, and state-permitted water level for my lake. The full pond elevation, the height of the main concrete spillway at the top of the dam, was 10 feet higher than the current water level. I had the legal, undeniable right to a much, much larger lake. I walked back out to the dam. I put my hands on the cold iron wheel, and with a deep, groaning sound of metal that hadn't been fully closed in half a century, I began to turn it. I slowly, deliberately closed the main drain. The flow of water to the creek downstream slowed from a steady rush to a trickle, and then to a dead, echoing silence. Now the only way for the millions of gallons of spring-fed water to leave my lake was to go up. 10 vertical feet. For the next few days, nothing happened. The sun shone. The residents of Emerald Bay enjoyed their newly unobstructed views, but I watched. Every day, I went to the old water level marker my grandfather had installed, and I watched the lake begin to rise, inch by inch, foot by foot. The water was slowly, patiently, inexorably reclaiming the shoreline that had been exposed for decades. And downstream, in the manicured paradise of Emerald Bay, the gentle babbling brook began to swell, its voice growing deeper, angrier. A week later, the first big spring rainstorm of the season rolled in. It was a deluge. For me, it meant my lake, fed by the rain in its own tireless springs, beautifully reached its full legal level. The water just beginning to kiss the bottom of the main spillway. For the residents of Emerald Bay, it was a catastrophe. The now engorged creek, with no room to spread out in its now constricted, its landscaped channel and fed by the full thunderous power of my spillway, breached its banks. It flooded their perfect lawns. It swamped their expensive, custom-built patios. In outdoor kitchens, it began to creep up the stone foundations of their $10 million homes. And that's when I found myself in my workshop, a mug of hot coffee in my hand, watching the world she had built being washed away. The authorities were called, of course. The County Emergency Management Agency, the EPA, the sheriff, was a full-blown disaster scene. I met them at my gate. I was calm, I was prepared. I presented them with my documents, the certified original deed for my property, including my legally defined water rights, the official state-issued permit for my dam, and then I presented them with the high-definition, time-stamped security camera footage of Brenda and her hired thugs illegally and feloniously demolishing my private property. I explained the situation in the calm, measured tones of a professional engineer. "Gentlemen," I'd said, "after witnessing this criminal act of destruction downstream from my dam, I had no choice but to begin the process of returning the lake to its full, legally permitted, operational level. I am in the process of conducting a full top-to-bottom structural integrity assessment of the entire dam and spillway system. For safety reasons, I cannot and will not lower the water level until my assessment is complete. It could take months." Authorities, faced with my ironclad legal documents and the undeniable evidence of Brenda's criminal actions, could do nothing. I was operating completely within my rights. The focus of their investigation turned, immediately and violently, away from me and toward the illegal demolition of my dock and the subsequent and clearly unpermitted construction of multi-million-dollar homes on a known and officially designated floodplain. Brenda and the HOA were not just defeated, they were obliterated. She was arrested and charged with felony destruction of property and a litany of environmental crimes. The HOA was facing a massive multi-million-dollar lawsuit from me, and even more deliciously, they were now facing an even bigger class action lawsuit from all of their own, now literally underwater residents. Their homes were unsellable. Their paradise was a swamp. The This whole brutal war taught me a profound lesson about the awesome, indifferent power of nature and the supreme arrogance of those who think they can control it. Brenda thought she could impose her will on the landscape. She destroyed a small, simple wooden dock, a symbol of my family's past. And in doing so, she unleashed a quiet, patient, and utterly unstoppable force that washed away her entire, glittering and fraudulent future. She wanted to control the water's edge. She just never bothered to understand or to respect. The man who controlled the water, Brenda, is facing jail time, and the HOA is bankrupt, with their assets being liquidated. To pay for the lawsuits, but a consortium of her former, now very damp, residents has just filed a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit against the county for approving their original building permits on the floodplain 30 years ago. And they've just subpoenaed all of my grandfather's records and my own professional engineering certifications as part of their discovery.